We all have something that we've got to deal with. And it's really more important to look for a partner who's also willing to look at the patterns, talk about them, work on them. You can be 60 years old and you never looked at anything. And it's not too late to say, I didn't realize it. In my house, everything was so peaceful, but nobody ever talked about their feelings or dealt with conflict. We always pretended everything was fine. I wonder what that taught me. If you have somebody who's willing to engage in that, that's what matters, because these dynamics from the past do not have to own us in the present.
Hey everybody, it's Sandy Weiner. Welcome back to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it is never too late to go on your last first date. To support your journey to lasting love, I have written 3 books, and my 3rd book was just published in September 2024. It's called Love at Last: True Stories of Falling in Love Later in Life. I love this book. It is a dream of mine to share stories of clients, of people I know, people I don't know, who all have unique stories of how they met their partners, how they fell in love later in life. And you can find all 3 books on Amazon for Kindle or paperback. Before I bring my guest on, I want to invite you to join me at Your Last First Date. That's my Facebook group. It is a unique group for women over 40 who want to go on their last first date and get positive support. My guest today is Colette Fehr. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist and the co-host of the podcast Insights from the Couch: Mental Health at Midlife. And she's the author of an upcoming relationship book, The Cost of Quiet, and it's going to be released by Penguin Random House in 2025. Welcome, Colette.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here, Sandy.
I think that was like the shortest bio I've ever
Yeah,
I've ever
cut to the
read.
chase, right? Just
I
cut right
know.
to the chase.
So many people give me like the 300-word bio, and I'm like, that's way too much
And
information.
nobody
Just,
cares.
nobody
Nobody
cares.
cares.
We just want to hear what's going on. So
Exactly.
today I'm really excited about this topic. We are talking about challenges in dating in midlife and challenges as older people dating. So let's just begin with, first of all, why are you interested in this topic?
Well, I work exclusively with couples in my private practice doing relationship counseling. And I got into this job because I went through a difficult divorce. And, really, I was married to my college sweetheart. So I didn't even really figure out anything about dating and relationships until I was well into adulthood and past the point where most people had learned. And a big part of my mission and why I became a couples therapist is that I really am so strongly an advocate of relationships and how they enhance your life. We know that loneliness is the silent killer of all human beings and that we need connection, even though it doesn't have to be romantic. So I just love this topic because I feel like it's why I do what I do, helping people have that kind of healthy love and connection.
I could not agree with you more. And I have a very similar story, as we were talking before we started,
Yes.
that we share a lot of similarities. But I also got into this field because of my divorce and because I really had no idea the skills that were involved in dating and relationships,
Exactly.
that we actually can learn them and do better. And let's prevent the most people possible from making the same mistakes over and over
Exactly.
again.
Exactly. I had to learn the hard way by falling flat on my face a lot and getting my heart broken a lot. I am remarried now, but I had 11 years between my 2 marriages. So I had a lot of time single on my own, dating. I was in many relationships, both serious and more casual. So I have a lot of personal experience to draw from. And then, of course, I have a lot of anecdotal experience from almost 12 years of working with couples in my office, and then previously working with individuals who are dating at this stage of life.
Well, you know what? If you learn from your mistakes, that's the most important thing. And the fact that you're out there learning and trying and doing and having your heart be open, because your heart can't get broken unless it's open. That's the most important thing, I think. So many people are on the sidelines watching and afraid. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
let's just dive right into what other people experience as
Yeah.
challenges and maybe some of the challenges you experienced as well.
First of all, let me actually just say that there is, and I know not telling you anything you don't know, but it actually can be so rewarding. And there are so many advantages to dating later in life from when we're younger. We have life experiences, we have had failures and disappointments, and we've learned from those. We're more emotionally mature if we've done our work. Many of us know how to communicate better. We're less superficial, right? There's so much that's so rewarding. A lot of times you can really find a partner who's ready to show up in a full intentional way. And it's possible, I think, to have a better relationship than any before if you start at 40s and up from, when you get involved with someone at 18 and it tends to be very physically focused and sometimes more superficial. So I think there's tremendous advantage, but there are some challenges. And the flip side of the coin that I'm talking about right now is that we're wounded. Right? We've been through a lot. It is impossible to date someone at 40 plus and not encounter a lot of baggage. And it doesn't have to ruin things, but it's just something for us to be aware of that people have been through often significant abandonment and rejection, even if it's just by virtue of losing a spouse, their spouse has died or a loved one has died. Many people have been through divorces. They have been hurt. They have walls up, either all the way or partially. And we really have to know how to navigate that.
Yeah, so thank you for starting with the good. I love that. I usually have my clients focus on what's good. What are we celebrating today before we get into what's horrible? But yeah, my latest book, Love at Last, is about people who found love later in life. And I wrote this story to give people hope because there's such beautiful stories of couples who did do the work and had been through other relationships, and they appreciated what makes a good relationship. I think we often date by instinct when we're younger. We don't really understand our attachment styles. We don't really understand what we learned from childhood, from our families of origin. Even with good parents, we often learn the wrong lessons. Sometimes people have said to me, my parents had the greatest marriage, or they're still married and it's been 50 years, which doesn't always mean that it was a healthy marriage or that
Exactly.
they saw conflict being resolved in front of them. Like, what are some of the things that you've seen that have led to some of the wounds that people have later in life?
Yeah, you're spot on. So, childhood emotional neglect is a big one, especially if you're over 40 at this point. You likely grew up in a family. I mean, either there was trauma and things were pretty dysfunctional in an overt way, but also as damaging that people don't talk about as much is if things seemed smooth at the surface, but underneath that, nothing was really being dealt with in an honest way. And we didn't used to talk about these things. So many people had loving parents who were just emotionally checked out. And it's not that they didn't love their children, but because they didn't know how to deal with their own emotions, they didn't attune to their children's emotions. And so, what I mean by that, the simple example is, a kid who skins her knee and goes and cries to mom or dad. The old way used to be, you're fine. It's no big deal. Get back out there. Everything's good. Right. And what we know now is that even though that's well intended, that is actually emotionally dismissive and invalidating. So the more attuned response is, oh, that looks like it really hurts. Come here. Let me hug you. You probably need to cry. I get it. That looks so painful, right? We can sit here as long as you need to, and I'm going to be with you in your emotional experience. So the challenge is that either people have, complex post-traumatic stress that was not dealt with from an abusive, violent, or emotionally or physically abusive home, or they may have neglect where their parents weren't tuned in and they don't even know what they're missing. So when it comes to an adult romantic relationship, they don't really know how to be attuned and responsive. And those emotional attachment needs are so important for a healthy relationship.
Yeah, that's very well said. And
Thank you.
yeah, it is just so important to take a look at the history, the patterns we've created, and to start to untangle all of that because it's easy to blame your parents for the rest of your life. Like I told my daughter when she was blaming me for the horrible divorce and what her horrible life was like, I understood. Yeah, it does suck to have divorce and to have to
Yep.
be going between two homes. But it's also important to know that this is the new normal. And what are we going to do about it? We can play victim or we can play victor. We can learn new strategies.
Yes, and along those lines, Sandy, let me just say that whatever the patterns are, and let's say you meet someone that you're interested in, this isn't, oh, you had an effed up childhood, bye, right? This is really what I would argue. And first of all, we all have something that we've got to deal with. And it's really more important to look for a partner who's also willing to look at the patterns, talk about them, work on them. You can, and I see this in my office every day, you can be 60 years old and you never looked at anything. And it's not too late to say, I didn't realize it. In my house, everything was so peaceful, but nobody ever talked about their feelings or dealt with conflict. We always pretended everything was fine. I wonder what that taught me. If you have somebody who's willing to engage in that, that's what matters because these dynamics from the past do not have to own us in the present.
I'm so glad you mentioned the willingness and the openness because I have had so many clients come to me and say, I think it's a big red flag that this person hasn't been in therapy or, done the work. And I'm so much more evolved than they are, which is true for most women, I would
Yep,
say. I'm
I
going to
agree.
generalize here, right?
I agree.
But there are other ways, first of all, for people to grow. I to me, it's having a growth mindset. It's
Yes.
having the ability, the willingness to grow. I mean, my sister just got remarried a year ago after a very difficult marriage. And
Mm.
one of the things that I loved about her future spouse when they were dating was that he was willing to work things out. He was willing to hear her point of view. He didn't have to be right all the time. And he was willing to go for help when they needed help. And I think to me, that is so much of the foundation of a healthy relationship.
So this is the heart of
Hmm.
what I'm glad you like that word too, because willingness is the heart of what I talk about. And I will just share very transparently because I think it's helpful for people to know that even somebody who does nothing but couples therapy and is certified in all the things and all the letters and all the education, that this is a struggle for me and people like me too, because we're all human. And so much of what makes a relationship dynamic work is really beneath all of the issues and the stuff we get in our head about. It's really nervous system regulation, emotional attunement. And so willingness is important because in my own life, for example, as an illustration, I mentioned I was 11 years between marriages. My husband's 10 years older than I am. And when I met him, he grew up on a farm in Kentucky. He had never, he's 61, I'm 51. He had never gone to any kind of meaningful therapy or talked about emotions. He's a numbers guy, he's a spreadsheet person. So this was a completely foreign world. And we had a wonderful courtship. I felt very safe with him. And there were certain things that were important to me in a partner that I hadn't had in my first marriage that I prioritized. But after this wonderful courtship, we hit some really, really difficult bumps to the point where we almost got divorced right after we got married. We blended a family with four daughters who were all at very fragile ages, middle school and early high school. We grew up in very different families with different communication styles. I'm Irish, Italian, New Yorker. There's my mom's a lawyer, my dad's a doctor. Everybody's always debating and emoting in my family. And he grew up in a stoic German Catholic family on a farm in Kentucky. So we did not know how to really understand each other. And it was very, very difficult to communicate through those challenges. But what made our marriage work is that my husband was willing. And even though he'd never gone to therapy, I said, we got to go to couples therapy. We went to workshops. We did all kinds of stuff and we learned how to talk and engage. And he didn't know anything about emotions, but he was willing to explore and learn how to validate and learn how to share more of his vulnerability. And it's not perfect, but that's what's made the difference.
Thank you for sharing your personal story. I appreciate it. And
Yeah.
it's really helpful to hear the nitty gritty and the fact that all of us have struggles. They don't go away totally. I mean, I think what there's a big misunderstanding that anybody who's an expert in something is perfect at it. And it's the humanity that actually makes us relatable. And
Right.
the fact that we have tools and strategies so that
Yes.
we may have the triggers, but we know how to work through them.
Exactly.
So let's get into some strategies here.
Yeah.
We always like to share something that our audience can take away.
Yep.
So how can people date more effectively? What are some of the strategies that you can share?
Yes, so important. I think first of all, looking for knowing what you're looking for, right? And being upfront about that. Not talking yourself into a situationship if you don't want a situationship. If you want a committed relationship, acknowledge that you deserve that. If you want a situationship, great, but really connect to your needs and be vocal about it, asking somebody what they're looking for. It sounds so basic, but many people skip that step. The second thing is to really look for emotional intelligence in a partner or the willingness to develop emotional intelligence because we're all a work in progress. And I think emotional intelligence is bandied about so much that people forget what it's really about. And emotional intelligence is really being able to be aware, self aware of what you're feeling. And then also to regulate and manage your emotions and to be able to connect with somebody else in their emotions. At the end of the day, however different or similar you are from a partner, whether you both love to play tennis and pickleball, or you both hate it, or you have completely different hobbies, it is going to really come down to building secure and safe attachment with someone. And that is based on that emotional rapport and connection. So that is a huge thing to look for. And I encourage people that, if you find someone who, just to your point, Sandy, women often, we have a lot of close girlfriends. We are nurtured into developing those emotional skills by society, right? We're supported for it, where men have historically taught to be strong and silent and push their emotions down. We're changing that slowly. So if you're heterosexual and you're a woman and you meet a man, let's say, and he's not so developed yet in that front, asking questions about, are you open to those conversations? Do you know what you typically feel? Are you open to even learning to talk about what you feel? Because long term, that's absolutely essential for connection.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Music Unlimited. You can listen to over 70 million songs and thousands of playlists and stations. Plus, you can now stream your favorite podcasts like Last First Date Radio. You can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, on any of your devices. Get Amazon Music Unlimited for free for 30 days. Just head on over to getamazonmusic.com/last first date to learn more and claim this offer. I have clients who got into relationships before they met me, and the person they've been with for like years, has a really hard time with emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And whenever she brings up her needs, he gets defensive. He
Yeah.
throws it back on her, but you're also this way. And I can only help her, just
Right.
I don't know how far this relationship can go in terms of developing it any further and having it meet her needs. But something I realized is they both have very similar childhood wounds where they don't feel seen. They shut down quickly if they don't feel heard and understood. And they have different ways of expressing that. And she's working really hard on her communication and her ability to even feel emotions and express them. Sometimes when you change the couple changes. Have you had
Always.
success? Yeah, helping one partner change the
Yeah.
dance? Yeah.
Yeah, so I work with a type of couples therapy called emotionally focused couples therapy, which is actually the evidence-based gold standard in treatment for couples. And it's all based on that dynamic, exactly what you're saying, that you can only do your side of the street. And my own husband struggles with much of what you just described with this client of yours and her partner. And I have to then, I don't know, you never know what you're going to get from your partner, but you do you, right? You do your best to connect to your needs, to use your assertive yet vulnerable voice in expressing yourself and holding your boundaries and making sure you're grounded and regulated. And when that happens, you are going to shift the dynamic. So I've worked with individuals for years. Now, it may be that when they change themselves, what they find out sooner by doing the right thing is that the relationship is not going to meet their needs, but it's still a win-win because first of all, the primary reason you come to the table in this way that's emotionally mature, clear, vulnerable, and assertive is for you because it feels good inside and you're not self-abandoning, right? We've all got to speak up. And then if your partner can't or won't meet you there, or let's say they're not willing, or they are willing and enough doesn't change. That's a very personal decision, but you're going to get that information very clearly sooner by doing your part and build your own confidence and ability to tolerate discomfort.
So, do you have any examples of the type of conflict that we're talking about where, let's say, somebody's behavior is really hurting you
Yeah.
and you bring it up and the person shuts you down and then turns it on you?
Yeah. So, in fact, this just came up the other day. Somebody who's dating someone very much in love, talking about marriage. I think they've been together for 6 or 7 months, and an older couple in their 50s. And, this is a heterosexual couple, and the man is just really bad about phone calls, and he travels a lot for work. And for the woman, she really feels disconnected when they don't talk regularly and because they can't see each other regularly. And he relies on text messages, but she does not feel connected that way. And this may seem like a small thing, but his lack of phone communication, not only does it make her feel disconnected, but the fact that she's kind of tried to bring it up and it never seems to get through makes her then, it goes to a childhood wound of feeling like my needs don't matter. I don't get heard, right? Even if I speak up, I'm not heard. And so what will often happen is that she'll say, you didn't call. And it sounds petty to him and he gets defensive. Well, I was busy and, I had this and it just slipped through the cracks. And the subtext that's not being addressed, right? What she's really got to do and what she's learned now to do is to say, I'm sure you have the best intentions. But when you don't call, especially if you lead me to believe that you will, and I've expressed this to you, then I feel like my needs don't matter. And that's something that goes way back for me, even before this relationship, but it really hurts in the present nonetheless. And it would mean a lot to me if you could make an effort to call. May not be a big deal to you, but it's how I feel connected. Right. Makes me feel like I'm important to you. And I really need that in order for this relationship to feel good for me. And then if he continues to be defensive and not really change behavior or be responsive to her needs, then that woman has to make a choice. Is this a hill I'm going to die on? Is this so important to me that if this doesn't change, I can't stay in the relationship? Or potentially, is this a childhood wound being played out in a way where I'm reenacting and attaching a kind of importance to this issue that perhaps doesn't have to be this important? Do I have some wiggle room to understand that this is how this man is? He's now shared with her that he's been this way in all of his relationships, right? It's not unique to her. And, am I going to end the relationship over something like that? But either way, her willingness to speak up is so critical. And what she can do if he continues to get defensive along the way is to be assertive and vulnerable about that too in the moment. I've noticed, and it's happening again right now, that when I tell you how I feel about you not calling, you get defensive or switch the subject. And that really hurts in the moment because I don't feel heard. And this is really important to me. I'm trying to get through. And if it continues, I'm going to disengage from that because I'm continuing to get defensiveness. And this feels frustrating and painful. But this issue is important to me. And if we can't talk about it, I have to think about where I go from here. So it's continuing to stay in the present, to be open, honest, heartfelt, authentic, right? Instead of letting a part of you that's reactive either shut down or get too puffed up.
Great language. I think a lot of people shut down, can become overly apologetic and and shrink. And there are issues that don't get resolved in relationships. That's a known fact.
Right.
And
69% of problems are perpetual.
That's like a lot. Gottmans are like, here's some big numbers. But yeah, it's really important to think about that. Like, can you live with this? And is this, maybe it's a me problem. Maybe it's something I can work on somewhere else. Maybe I can get my needs met in certain areas by other people or other things. And I think, it's complicated, but I think the more we know, the better we do. And I love that language because it's calm, it's not confronting, it's taking responsibility for your share, what's going on for you, but it also is really clear, here's what's at stake. And I think the what's at stake part for a lot of men does not get conveyed because women will use language that doesn't feel like it's that important. They might get pissy, they might get angry, men will call them hysterical. I remember when I first started dating, the people I was dating were saying that their relationships ended because the women were crazy.
Every guy says that.
Right. Women were crazy. And then women were saying the men were all narcissistic, controlling.
Guess what, Sandy? Nothing's changed.
I know. And it's just like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? And I think that so many people just would love to blame instead of taking responsibility. And I personally, I'm still dating. And if somebody says to me that it's all the woman's fault, I'm out of there so fast because I don't want to be with somebody who cannot take some self-reflection, some responsibility. What did you do? Even if the relationship was terrible, it took two people. And if you can't learn and you can't grow from it, then this isn't going to work.
Yeah, and that's part of the willingness is, are you willing at whatever stage of development you find yourself, are you willing to look at yourself and be curious and be honest and do an inventory and work on the places we all have, we're growing throughout the lifespan. You're never done. You're right, the cake's never baked. It's always in the oven. And that's actually a beautiful, beautiful thing. But I could not agree with you more that one of the mistakes we make as women, and I did this in my first marriage, we're so societally conditioned. I call it good girl-itis, right? To be nice, to be sweet, to be nurturers. And I think what we forget is that we can be kind, but also be assertive and direct. It doesn't have to come out, with venom. nor do we have to get reactive. And sure, there are a lot of men that are very quick to call women, emotional. I think what I heard in my first marriage, again, we were in college when we started. My ex-husband grew up in a household where nobody dealt with emotions at all. But what would happen, and I'm very emotional and expressive, is that I would want to share feelings, not even in a critical or blaming way. And he would be like, that's irrational. You're being dramatic. I mean, nothing that could be more invalidating in the universe than that, right? And what I now know as a couples therapist is that he wasn't trying to be a jerk. His own nervous system, not knowing how to cope with the experience of being an emotion, was getting a little bit activated and dysregulated. So he was trying to shut my emotions down so that he didn't have to feel uncomfortable. And yet, we need to do that work. So if somebody recognizes, hey, I grew up in a house where nobody talked about their feelings and I'm super uncomfortable with emotions, honestly, but I'm willing to work on that, great. That alone, that's that growth mindset. That's somebody you want to date.
I can relate to my ex-husband would just shut down. He stonewalled. And
Yeah.
so we could be on a walk and I would try to bring up what was going on and try to resolve something. And he'd just turn around and walk the other way.
Oof,
And it was like having a door slammed in my face. And I was like, I
so
didn't really
painful.
understand what it meant until I started reading Gottman after my divorce. And I was like, oh my God, this is one of the horsemen. This
Yeah.
is why this is so painful. And the lack of willingness to grow, because that's what I experienced over and over. Like we'd go to therapy and he'd say, I'm doing it for you, but he didn't really want to be there.
Yeah.
Now he's different, actually, and I've talked about it on the podcast before, where he really recognized the need for some personal work after I was like, "This is it. I'm not changing my mind. I'm really
Yeah.
leaving this time." And he became an expert in nonviolent communication and
Mm,
empathy. And he works with people to help them have more empathy and I mean, he still struggles. He still has
yeah.
some disconnect and hasn't done some of the
Yeah.
inner work that would be important, but it's helped so much in our relationship and the relationship he has with his children. And I'm actually doing a workshop on green flags tonight with my coaching group, the Women of Value Club. And I would love to hear from you. You mentioned growth mindset several times. You mentioned the willingness to do the work. What are some other green flags to look for?
Somebody who is willing to be honest and transparent from the beginning. Somebody who will tell you, like, I do not think I'll see some of these dating sites that encourage this, and I could not disagree more. I do not think it's ever too early to ask someone about their history and other relationships, their pain points. This is the stuff of humanity. We're not there to pretend that life is, one endless cruise ship vacation. So I think asking somebody and paying attention to how they talk about what's happened and are they being transparent and truthful. So, for example, if somebody starts calling his ex-wife crazy and a nightmare and has only negative things to say, that's a red flag. But if somebody says, I went through a really painful divorce and this happened and that happened, but I really, looking back, I made a lot of mistakes and here's what happened. And they tell you things that are not only vulnerable, but even potentially unflattering. That is a huge green flag, that authenticity and honesty. And another one that I think is critically important is consistency and reliability at any age. And why I think this is so important, Sandy, and this applies to everything with dating, is that from an attachment perspective, in terms of how we're neurobiologically wired, once we become attached to someone, which will happen typically between 6 months and 18 months of a relationship, Once our system is really accustomed to them, it becomes that much harder, even physically, because of all the neurotransmitters and neurochemicals that our body's running on at that stage to move away from somebody. So you really have to, of course, give somebody a little bit of leeway to see how they are. We don't want to cut everybody off at their first mistake. But if you don't pay attention and look for those green flags early, you can end up in something that you're already attached to somebody, even though you know rationally and intellectually they're not great for you. So, this is the time to prioritize these green flags. And that consistency and reliability is going to tell you so much about who that person is and how they move through the world. Even during a dating relationship, a courtship, a relationship should feel safe. It should feel consistent. It should feel reliable. Your nervous system may be pinging because you're feeling some dopamine and excitement. And, there's a rush of PEA and oxytocin and all of these things. So it's not that it's bad if you have more of that limerence feeling. Many people experience that. But you shouldn't be wondering, does this person like me? Am I going to hear from them? Will plans be made? And if you do, no matter what excuses are given, that's a really bad sign. I mean, I think it's like kind of the number one thing to look for. Right. And back to my
And
friend, does someone call when they say they will? It's still another part of me is like, get your shit together and call the girl when when you say you will. Like these things really, really matter because they let us know if we can trust somebody. And nobody at any age should be in a state of chaos and unpredictability. That's just anxiety producing.
yeah, it's very dysregulating to be with somebody who is inconsistent, hot and cold. They tell
Terrible.
you lovely things and then they are not in communication with you. Horrible.
Right. Right. And
Yeah,
then the
I'm like,
problem is when it's that intermittent reinforcement, like we all know we don't want that, right? But then you go into a mini withdrawal when you don't hear from them. And then you're wondering, spinning, why? Maybe there's a plausible reason. But then when you hear from them again, just at the point where you're ready to be like, I'm done, forget this, I'm out, like, I don't need this crap at this stage of my life, they come back in with some plausible reason and a rush of compliments or engagement. Oh, I want to see you. And how about this? And then there's so much dopamine and relief that it can become very, if not addictive, habitualizing to be hooked into that.
absolutely. I'm wondering also, I've been thinking a lot about people with ADD who they need those highs and lows to get that extra serotonin, dopamine, whatever they're getting. And I think for them in particular, anybody who's neurodivergent, I guess,
Yeah.
has some struggles here that maybe other people don't. What have your experiences been with that?
Yeah, I think there's truth to that. And I think that if you are in the neurodiverse population, whether it's ASD, autism spectrum disorder, or ADD, or gifted, whatever the case may be, knowing thyself and being aware that that may be a factor for you can help you have just that little bit of observing awareness that, oh, you know, I find that I'm getting hooked into this and I don't totally hate it. What else could be going on here? And our challenge in falling in love and dating is always to try to remain aware of what's happening as we're feeling all of this stuff that nature has wired into us to feel so good and be deceptive. These cliches that are old and true, like love is blind, rose-colored glasses, those didn't come about for no reason. There's powerful stuff happening inside that makes that true for even the most intelligent and savvy people.
Yeah, there's a great TED Talk that talks about the language we use around love and how we fall in love and our heart is broken. Like there's a lot of very kind of violent words that we use when we're falling in love. It's really interesting. And I think that we can take much more control of our
Yep.
experiences, especially as we're older, especially with more experience, especially with knowing ourselves. You just said, know thyself. And no matter what your experience has been, no matter your history, no matter what, the more aware you are, the more you can be present with what's going on for you in the moment and bring things up. Don't wait to bring things up until it's later and you're too attached, and then it becomes harder.
Exactly, exactly. And so much of this too, when we're talking about these green flags, be the green flag you're looking for. Lead by example. You show up and are vulnerable and tell the truth about your stuff. I mean, I won't get into it here because nobody wants to hear my awful little secrets in the, mothball ridden closet. But I got to the point when I was dating that I'd show up for like an 8-minute date at Starbucks because I became almost a professional about this, right? I was like, I have 8 minutes to meet you because I would want to meet someone in person. And I'd be like, okay, so here are all my skeletons. I did this. This is messed up about me. I have this, I have misophonia. Like I don't like the sound of people chewing. Like here's it all. And you don't have to be as ridiculous about it as I'm saying. I'm only being slightly hyperbolic, by the way. But there is something really powerful. We know vulnerability invites vulnerability. So lead with that example. Tell people the truth about your own life. Be reliable and consistent. Don't play games. There's nothing attractive about somebody who's looking to have power in a dating dynamic. Oh, well, you didn't call me, so I'm not going to call you. Better to just say, the last couple times between dates, I haven't really heard from you. Is there something going on, or can you help me understand what that's about? Be curious, right? But then evaluate that and don't just do that back. Instead, address it.
Yeah, it took me a lifetime to be able to do that. I remember
Me
one of
too.
the first times, right? One of the first times was with a guy who we had a great first connection, and then we went on a second date. It was really nice, and then he invited me on a third date, and his communication was getting worse and worse. He was not answering texts. And he never solidified plans for that Monday. We were going to meet on a Monday. We were going to go out to dinner. He invited me to his house. I said, it's too early for me to come over, but I'd love to meet you in public somewhere. You let me know where and when. And so I hadn't heard back. And I just let it go. I did not reach out again. I was putting too much effort in. And the next morning, he reached out to me and he said, oh my God, I can't believe I forgot plans. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. And I was so busy, and that was his thing. I'm so busy. I am working on a new business, and my son came to visit, and it was a lot of excuses. And I just was like, I forgive you. I just don't want to date you.
Good for you.
And I just said, you seem to be. I said, I'm looking for somebody who prioritizes dating and relationships. It
Yeah.
seems like your work is priority right now, and that's fine, but
Yep.
I'm going to move on.
Good
And
for
he was
you,
just like, oh,
Sandy.
please forgive me. Please forgive me. He wouldn't let me go. I'm like, yeah, I'm moving on. I forgave you.
Yep.
I'm not going to get caught up in that. But that is so empowering when you can speak up early on and not just take those little breadcrumbs and have that feeling of, oh my God, are they going to remember the date? Do I need to remind them that I
Yep.
exist?
Yep.
No.
Yep. Exactly. And that is such a beautiful illustration of exactly what we're talking about. I don't know how many people out there have the courage to do that, the wherewithal, the courage, the awareness, the willingness. But I know that everybody can do that with a little bit of work and intentionality because I used to be very people pleasing, passive aggressive, never wanted to like rock the boat. I never had a single fight with anyone until like 3 years into a relationship, and that wasn't good for me. And I ended up in relationships with people who were emotionally unavailable that I was constantly pursuing and chasing and trying to change and extract emotional availability like a stubborn tooth. And I had to learn that I'm going to be where I am. And I'm willing, if you're willing to work with me and you're willing to grow with me, okay. But if you're not emotionally available and that's not going to, I'm not going to chase or do the work for you or pull it out of you, right? You're going to have to meet me in that place. And otherwise, it is better just to say, great to meet you, but I'm moving on.
There are always more people out there. I think we forget that too. So This brings me to my final question.
Yes.
What are your final words of advice for anyone who wants to go on their last first date, Colette?
Ah, that what you talked about before, hope. People, I see it in my office every day. I've lived it in my own life. There are good people out there. It can take some time to find them, especially if you want a healthier partner, but it's worth the wait and worth the work. And don't get discouraged. I know discouragement can come in waves because it can be hard to be out there. There are a lot of also damaged people who don't do the work, but keep that hope alive because all it takes is one person who you may stumble on in the most unlikely of places. And all of a sudden, everything feels so different. And what I do know is that if you're not out there taking some risks, you're not going to find someone. It is like you have to be willing to like suffer through some hardship in order to get the reward. And I liken dating to, at this age especially, to going to TJ Maxx to find that one really cute top, right? There's so many clothes shoved on the racks. I mean, I hope all your listeners have been to a TJ Maxx and they get my reference, a Ross, a Marshalls, whatever. Pick your store where they've got that one cute top is in there, but you're going to have to maybe sift through some racks of clothes where you go, who are they making this for? Who's buying this? Right. And then you find that one blouse that just fits you perfectly. It's your color. You look great in it. And it was only $7.99, but it was originally $300. And you just feel like $1,000,000. So I think it's that perseverance and remembering, during those lowest moments that there's somebody out there for you. You just haven't met him or her yet.
And look for somebody whose price is marked down to $7.99.
Yes, but originally it was right value. Yes. Yes, we
I love
still
that.
want the high value.
I'm a big Marshalls shopper, and
Yeah.
I recently found a pair of shoes, running shoes they were great. I forgot what the original price was, but they were an amazing price and they were perfect for what I was looking for. And I didn't have to spend $150 on a pair of sneakers. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. They're
go,
your
go with,
partner. They're the equivalent of your partner.
yeah.
Your future partner is those running shoes.
Online dating specifically can feel like a cesspool. It can
Yes.
feel like an awful place full of rejection and disappointment and terrible communication. And again, just show up to it, show up because one
Yeah.
day that person might be online or at the gym or at
Yeah.
someplace else, and open up your possibilities. Because I agree with you. I think there are good people. You're not looking for 100 of them. You're looking for the one that works for you.
And can I just say one more thing about that? Just like a little suggestion that
Sure.
worked for me in my own life. You got to do all these different pathways and then you never know where it's going to happen. I had the worst experiences with online dating personally, but I still did it because I thought, all right, I'm keeping my muscles going and you never know. And I met some great people. In fact, in one of my talks, I mentioned that I had two men I dated from eHarmony at my second wedding because they became really good friends. So, it's still a connection. They've become friends with my husband. And so many good things happen. But in addition to perseverance online, I would also say, you've got to, sometimes we get we don't want to put it out there that we're dating or we want to meet someone. We can feel self-conscious, but you've got to do the opposite. Tell people that you'd like to meet someone because you never know who they may introduce you to. And then this person is also somewhat vetted. It's such a minority of people who meet people this way anymore because we've all become so accustomed to the online world. But it's a wonderful way to meet people. And my second tip is talk to people in unlikely places. Now, I happen to be someone who does this just as a human being, but it is how I met my husband. I had a very strong reaction to seeing something on TV that reminded me of an ex who had broken my heart. And I said something out loud. And the short version is that this led to a conversation with my husband, who was a complete stranger in a restaurant. And now we're married. So, you're online, chat with somebody. It doesn't have to be you're always, on such a strategy to meet someone, but you never know who you meet or where that's either a potential partner or knows a potential partner or invites you to something. So really open up and be engaged and practice being more connected as a person in your daily life. And that energy draws people in, and you also may surprise yourself with who you meet.
That's really wonderful. And thank you for sharing how you met your husband, because so many of the stories in my book are like that. And I remember meeting a woman who was really frustrated dating after her divorce, and she belonged to some kind of like a town hall business kind of group. And at the end of one meeting, somebody asked, like they always did, does anybody else have anything to share? And she said, yes, I'm looking for a husband. and and some guy said, well, I have a brother. He lives in Massachusetts and she lived in Connecticut. And she was like, she met him and married him.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. And see, exactly. Right. And
She
if
opened her mouth. Yeah,
okay,
you have
that's
to
the
ask.
tagline, Sandy. Right. Open your mouth. Speak.
Open your mouth.
Spit it out. Just spit it out. You know what? It's a potential moment of a little discomfort or embarrassment, but you never know what could happen on the other side.
Yeah. Oh my
And I'm
God, I
going to
could
get your
talk to
book. I
you.
can't wait to read it. I can't wait to
Oh,
read your
thank
book.
you. And I can't
Yeah.
wait to read yours
Dang, it's
when
going to
it
be a
comes
hot
out.
minute, but thank you.
Oh, it's a process. Writing
That
a
it
book is
is.
like birthing a child.
It is. It
Maybe
is.
even more painful sometimes.
I agree. I agree.
But the reward is great, and you get to share it with so many people. Colette, you are
Yes.
awesome. Tell us a link where people can find you.
Yes. So my website is ColetteJaneFehr.com, and Colette is with one L. And my Instagram, I'm on Instagram and TikTok, as well as all the other social medias at Colette Jane Fehr. And I post videos that are educational and informational and little tidbits that can help you with some of this relationship stuff. And there's lots of resources on my website. I have a great newsletter and also some freebies that will help you with communicating with a partner, whether dating or in a long-term relationship. So check those things out too.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm sure there's lots of great value everywhere. So could connect with Colette. That sounds like a good name for a podcast.
Yes,
Connect with
perfect.
Colette. And thank you so much for joining me today. I loved our conversation. This is such an important conversation.
I agree, Sandy. Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun.
And thanks everybody for listening today. If you love our show, please give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Go out and tell your friends, follow the show, buy my books. And as always, here's to your last first date. If you are ready to get unstuck, gain new tools, become more empowered, and finally find your last first date, I'd love to talk to you. Fill out an application to be considered for a complimentary half-hour love breakthrough session at lastfirstdate.com/application.